It's exactly 9:42 a.m. And on September 11, 2001, according to Western media, Al Qaeda hijacked 4 airplanes and carried out suicide attacks against targets in the United States. Two of the planes were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. A third plane hit the Pentagon just outside Washington, D.C., and the fourth plane crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Almost 3,000 people were killed during the 9/11 attacks, which triggered major U.S. initiatives and reprisals. And we do know that the rest is history as far as the Middle East is concerned, particularly Afghanistan. Let's talk to Sami Al-Arian. He is a political activist of Palestinian origin, and he's going to talk to us 9/11, 20 years later. Assalamu alaikum to you. Welcome to the show.
Alaikum salam. Great to be with you.
Lovely to have you on the show. So that's the Western narrative of the 9/11 attacks. How does the Muslim world, how does the Middle East see it? And is it justified that America did what they did in Afghanistan and then pulled out 20 years later?
Well, regardless of how we look at the attacks themselves and the motivations behind them, and of course they were tragic when you look at the amount of people that were killed. However, the Western political establishment had to answer the question to its people: why were we attacked? Is it because of what Bush said at the time? They hate us, they hate our freedoms, and they hate our democracy. Or is it because of the policies that the West has been pursuing in that part of the world for decades? And of course, if they were going to say it's because of our policies, that means that they have to change policies. So the answer that they gave to their people is that it's because they hate us because of who we are. And because they hate us who we are, we can't change who we are, then we have to change them. And because of the unipolar moment where the United States was the only power, the only superpower in the world, because no one even came close at the time, they found that they could afford to go and invade the Muslim world. The whole idea, of course, was crazy, but they thought that they're going to go to Afghanistan, they finish the rule of Taliban in 6 weeks, then they're going to go into Iraq, they finish it in 1 month. And the whole point was they're going to pacify these societies, they're going to establish political systems that would be on their face political liberal democracies, and then they're going to go after that into Iran, Syria, Somalia, Libya, you name it. And of course that didn't pan out, that didn't work out. And because there is, as the new editorial, I think, in the Wall Street Journal, Wall Street Journal, in which they said the inconquerable Muslim world. I mean, it's not easy. And I think they found the hard way, the same way the British found in the 19th century and the Soviet in the 20th century, that you simply cannot invade Afghanistan and get away with it. Now they found that 20 years later. At the time, I believe Mullah Omar, who was leading Afghanistan and the Taliban at the time, he said that Bush promised defeat to us and Allah promised us victory, and we will see which promise would be kept. And I think that has been answered now 20 years later.
Having said that, we do know that Biden has suggested that the 20 years of occupation in Afghanistan has cost the American taxpayer almost $3 trillion. My question is, what did it cost the Afghani people and the other Muslim countries surrounding Afghanistan? And then also let's move into the sphere of conspiracy theories. Do we kind of buy into them? Is there any merit in looking into them deeper than at face value? Is it really the Western world that were trying to demonize the Islamic world and then try and get away with it?
Well, let's be clear about one thing, that money never really, most of it never left the United States. So even whether they spent $2 or $3 trillion, most of it went to weapons companies, defense companies, contractors. contractors, and so on and so forth, most of it stayed really in America. I mean, these are the people who actually benefited from the war. It wasn't really Americans.
Creating jobs for the American
I
people.
don't know about jobs. I mean, a lot of people, yeah, I mean, jobs for certain people, not for the
Yes.
American
Mhm.
person who didn't see much of a hike in their salaries during much of that time. And secondly, as I said earlier, this was during the unipolar moment where the United States can print money, you know, whenever it wants. No one really is going to hold it accountable. Let's remember that the United States went from 1985 until now, for about 36 years, from $1 trillion, $1 trillion of debt to now almost 28, $29 trillion. So no one was holding them accountable. Of course, now we're in a different world after 2016, 2017. The point is that they could afford to do that without much accountability, without much impact on its economy, whether in inflation or other ways. But of course, that is just the cost in terms of financial terms. They also lost with the contractors about 2,500 soldiers, about that number in American contractors, and of course, a similar or less number from the NATO allies. But look at the devastation they wreaked on Afghani society. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. They were made homeless. Afghanistan today is poorer after $2 trillion than it was back in 2001. 2001, according to the United Nations, the average Afghani earned about $2 a day. Today, it's less than $2 a day. So that tells you that not much of that money really didn't go into the pockets or into the Afghani society, and not to say anything about the corruption that was taking place in mass by the Afghani political elites who tied themselves to the occupation. So the average Afghani citizen really didn't see much except misery, except drones killing them during their weddings and funerals and other events where you saw also that children were targeted, by the hundreds in their playing fields because somehow someone in North Dakota thought that this was a training camp and it was just kids playing, and they were targeted by drones and they lost their lives. So you could see that really the impact of this occupation has been devastating to the Afghani society, and many people actually saw this much earlier. There are people who saw this defeat coming 15 years ago, 10 years ago. So for them to admit it now, obviously, is for two reasons. One is because it was obvious that what the United States is doing is failing in large scale, and the Taliban was becoming stronger and stronger by the day. And secondly, because of the rise of China, which, if left unchecked, they will surpass the United States within 10 years.
The Western world, very especially America, is commemorating the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the attacks. I have no doubt that scores of people will make their way to ground zero, offer prayers, put down flowers, etc., etc. What about the Islamic world? What about the lives lost in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and the rest of the Muslim world? What ought we be commemorating on this day? I mean, we know the Palestinian situation is something, a discussion for another day. It is absolutely horrendous when you think about that genocide. There's no one that, and Americans continue supporting the Israelis with arms and money, etc., etc.
Well, a decent human being must look at all lives as being sacred. There is no life that is better or worthier than another life. So whether people died in the 9/11 attacks or died on the grounds in Afghanistan or Iraq or in Palestine or Kashmir or any other place in the world, obviously, it is something that should be condemned and should be something that should be mourned. We shouldn't just be mourning, those people who died on 9/11, even though this was tragic and a lot of innocent people died. But also, let's face it, most of these people, if not all of them, at least their families, I mean, they were compensated to the tune of 10 million or more dollars. They took it from the American government, from the taxpayers. They also were compensated from other places, including Muslim countries, including Iraqi, including Libyan, and so on and so forth. But look at the Muslims. When an Afghani person died because of American drone attacks or bombs or airplane raids or whatever it was. And even when the Americans actually admitted that they were killed erroneously because they were innocent, what were they compensated for? $2,000, $3,000. That's how much they think a Muslim life is worth, while they think an American or Western life is worth 10 million or more. I mean, it's a basic racism, racist mentality that looks at
Absolutely.
the world in different ways. And I think we need in the Muslim world to mourn all life, but also those who died innocently because of the invasion of armies that came to take revenge on something that these people were never a part of.
Dr. Sami Al Arian, spoken as a true Muslim in a very unbalanced world. Shukran indeed for your thoughts on the show this morning. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum to you.
Salam. Thank you for inviting me.
9:53 exactly. This is News and Views right here on Salam Media.